everyone, and welcome to week 1 of our course, and we will be talking about a sustainable future. So in this module you will find we will have a lecture on a sustainable future, and we're also going to talk about the scientific method, which is really important in terms of thinking like a scientist and how to analyze what is sustainability, what's green chemistry. So it's an important skill to really understand, and you'll find a quiz actually on the scientific method. All right, well, let's get started on our lecture. So, first of all, a sustainable future. That is the first chapter in our, or it's actually called Chapter 0 in our textbook. So here's a picture of our Earth. There's about 7 billion people on Earth as of today. And we need to find a way that we can live together and preserve our home, or make sure it's there for the future. And this really is the crux of sustainability, right? And if we look at the UN document called Our Common Future, it's also referred to as the Brundtland Report, they define sustainability as development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. I want you to take a moment here to notice that the definition says nothing about protecting the environment. This definition is really more about our survival. So when we look at that 7 billion figure on Earth, it seems like one person's not really going to make a difference, but in actuality we do make a difference. Every individual makes a difference. And the analogy I have for you is the water molecule here and the ocean, and a person and a sea of people. So if you take one molecule away of water, right, eventually if you keep removing the molecules, you have no ocean. So what that means is the water molecule is important to the ocean, and the same thing for the individual. If you remove an individual, eventually you'll be removing all the people, and so that individual is important to humanity. And what that tells you is that we are all interconnected. As individuals and with our collective effort, we can make significant differences in our world. And there's many, many examples in our history where individuals have led movements or have been part of movements to make differences in our world. And that's something to keep in mind, that we do make differences. And who doesn't want us to believe that? Basically, anyone who benefits from the status quo. Anyone. So who benefits from the way things are now? Now, that UN document identified the #1 area of sustainability is energy. Not recycling, not conservation, etc. They all go into play here, but energy is what is our crisis for the future and even now. If you think about how we make our water, how we purify water, how we get water from Northern California to Southern California, how we grow our food, how we drive to work, how we drive our food places, etc. All of these things require energy. Without energy, our societies would fail and collapse. So we have to find a way to make a sustainable future #1 in terms of energy. And this really might play into our alternative forms of energy, such as wind and solar energy. Keep in mind, though, that the sustainability startup costs are often expensive, but in the end, they pay off. To make sustainability successful, we have to keep in mind some other considerations. Here's a picture of a child in a Darfur refugee camp, right? This is a place that has been Darfur is a place that's been destroyed from climate change, right? Drought, famine, refugees, and then people fighting over resources, war, bloodshed, starvation. Terrifying, right? So that's something you have to keep in mind. To even worry about sustainability, you have to worry about first economic development. People who are living day to day just to survive, find food, they don't care about what's sustainable. You have to worry about economic development first. Social development, right? That's also key, right? You have to uplift the community. Environmental protection, right? You can't have You can't just say, let's make things sustainable without worrying about the environment, because they often go hand in hand. And these things need to be done at a local, national, regional, and global levels. And in terms of social development, that also includes education for women, children, human rights. All of these things go into play. Now, in terms of chemistry, we have something called the Venn diagram. You might have heard about it in one of your math classes. But basically, you have these three systems. You have healthy economies, healthy communities, and healthy ecosystems, right? That all plays into the last slide about what we need to take into consideration for sustainability. When you combine all three of those aspects, you get what we call the green zone, which is your sweet spot here. This is what any industry or chemistry related field is looking at doing, is hitting that sweet spot, the green zone. Okay, and the principles of green chemistry are simplified into these 6 steps. So it is better to prevent, number 1, it's better to prevent waste than to treat or clean up waste after it is formed. So you need to find some kind of chemical process or industrial process that prevents waste in the first place. You don't even make it. Or a second step would be, if you have to make waste, to minimize the amount. So can you use smaller starting quantities? Can you use a different starting material that will produce less waste in the end? Step 3 is better to use and generate substances that are non-toxic, right? So you can look at the outcomes of all your chemical reactions. What are the final products? What are the products in the middle? All those things, are they toxic? Can we use a pathway that's non-toxic? And 4, it is better to use less energy, right? Because that's the number 1 identified issue for sustainability. How can we does your reaction require heat? How much heat? Can we find a reaction that does not require heat or less heat? And it is better to use renewable materials. So can we recycle it? Is this a plastic that you produce that can only be used one time? So many of our plastics only can be used once, and that's it. You can never remelt them and reprocess them. Also, some of our waste products can actually be reused as starting materials for other industries. So some companies will actually sell their waste to other companies to use as starting materials, which is kind of cool. And 6, it is better to use materials that degrade into innocuous products at the end of their useful life. Can we make them biodegradable, etc.? So that in the end they go back into nature and don't last around forever polluting our world. Here's a quick example of Clorox. Clorox bleach is a pretty toxic chemical, but they actually have come up with a whole product line of green cleaners. So you can go ahead at some point, look through this website and just check out, all of the, they try to make non-toxic, biodegradable, environmental friendly products that you can actually use around your house to clean. Let's go back to the lecture slides. And, just keep in mind that vinegar is really a great cleaning supply too. So, okay, let's go down. So here is a figure that represents the ecological footprint based on how much land is required to support an individual. So these numbers given to you are in hectares, and a hectare is 2 acres. So the U.S. per person requires 9.7 hectares per year to support individuals on Earth. They're individuals on Earth. And you can see that the U.S., the individuals from the USA, require more land than any other country on Earth. So this is something that we need to think about. Why do we as individuals in the USA need so much energy, so much land? And if you look at what we're doing in terms of the amount we're consuming, this is a graph that shows you where we are going from 1970, and this is the number of planet Earths we need to sustain our lifestyle. And currently, and this is about 2005 on this map, so it's a little bit while ago, but still, the same idea is that around this time frame, we needed an Earth and a quarter to sustain what we're doing. So already we're at a point where we're not sustaining Earth. We're not able to preserve what we have here for our future. We're already using it up too much. And if we keep going at the same rate from the last slide, using the same amount of stuff, needing the same amount of land, and the population just increases, by 2040, it looks like we're going to need 2 Earths, which is not possible. It's not sustainable. So we need to find a way to reduce, to find a way to become sustainable. And this is old news. Many of our first civilizations on Earth already had catastrophic events for them by overusing their resources and not being sustainable. They deforested, overgrazed. They had salinization or soil erosion, so that's too much salt. That's what this picture is here, too much salt in the soil, so you can't grow anything in it. That's from over-irrigation. So a lot of these fertile regions became semi-arid or deserts. You see this in Egypt, China, Mesopotamia, the Mayans, right? These are some a picture of Mayans, a representation of Mayans / burning. So a lot of these places that were once forests became, wastelands. And Easter Island is a great example. They had 20,000 people at the height of their civilization, and by the 1700s, they only had 2,000 people left because they had cut down every tree on the island. There were no trees left, so they couldn't build boats, they couldn't make rope, they couldn't grow vegetables anymore because the soil was not being kept down by the trees. It was getting just swept away into the ocean, so they were dying of starvation. And it's one of those cannibalistic horror stories at the end. So something to keep in mind, and this is not just old news. We have recent examples of this in the U.S. That's called our Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, where from poor farming practices, the wind came in, swept off our soil. And you can see that even this home being buried in the soil here because of the wind just carrying it away. So we couldn't grow crops. People were starving in the streets. So sustainability. It's not really about a destination. It's simply a direction, how we can make changes in our life. Okay? And I like this quote from Martin Luther King. Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Okay? And in this course, hopefully you will learn that you are important and you can make differences. Okay? I will see you all next time. Bye-bye.